My name is Bessie, and I am 35 years old. For 7 years, I was the records custodian at WealthGuard Financial until the new COO declared me non-essential and had security escort me out. 3 months later, when SEC auditors demanded to see the records custodian, the company discovered just how essential I really was. As legal whispered about the $5 million hourly penalty, I felt something unexpected vindication. Before I share what happened next, drop a comment telling me where you are watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of workplace justice. I never planned to become a records custodian. Most kids do not dream of managing financial documentation, but my detail-oriented personality and degree in information management made me perfect for the role. Living in a modest apartment in Chicago, I had built a comfortable life for myself after graduating with honors and working my way up through several smaller companies before landing at WealthGuard Financial. WealthGuard was not just any financial management firm. With over $20 billion in assets under management, we handled investments for everything from pension funds to high net worth individuals. The company occupied 15 floors of a gleaming downtown skyscraper with mahogany furniture and city views that impressed clients and intimidated competitors. The pressure was immense, but so was the compensation, and I had carved out my niche in this high-stakes world. My official title was records custodian, but that undersells the complexity of what I did. I was responsible for ensuring that every single transaction, communication, and decision was properly documented according to the stringent regulations set forth by the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, and the financial industry, regulatory authority FINRA. A single violation could result in millions in fines, regulatory sanctions, or even criminal charges for executives. Over my 7 years at WealthGuard, I had built a comprehensive management system that tracked, organized, and maintained the mountain of documentation required by law. It was complex but efficient, with safeguards and redundancies that had saved the company on numerous occasions. Each morning I arrived at 6:30 to review overnight transactions from Asian markets, ensuring every trade had proper documentation before the rest of the staff trickled in. My direct supervisor, Eleanor Reynolds, was the compliance director and one of my strongest advocates. A tall woman in her 50s with a no-nonsense attitude and impeccable taste in blazers, Eleanor understood the critical nature of our work. "Bessie, your department is our insurance policy," she once told me during my performance review. "Investment bankers make the money, but people like us keep them out of prison." I had built solid relationships with several colleagues who understood the value of my work. Rachel Chen, in compliance, was my closest ally, always consulting with me on complex cases. Timothy Park from IT had customized our systems to my specifications, creating a seamless digital interface that streamlined our processes. Jessica Wells from legal constantly praised how my meticulous records had protected the company during disputes. My proudest achievements were the 3 major incidents I had prevented. One involved a trader attempting to hide losses by misclassifying them, which I caught during routine verification. Another was a documentation inconsistency that revealed a potential money laundering attempt by a new client. The third was identifying a pattern of excessive fees that violated FINRA regulations before it became systemic. During our last regulatory audit 2 years ago, the auditors had specifically commended my department for our exemplary record-keeping practices and industry-leading compliance protocols. I received a modest bonus and a handwritten note from the CEO thanking me for protecting the company. That recognition meant everything to me. I was not in a glamorous role that generated revenue, but I was essential to the company's integrity and longevity. My daily routine was demanding but fulfilling. I typically managed a team of 4 specialists who helped process the enormous volume of records. Each morning began with reviewing overnight transactions, followed by responding to compliance inquiries, conducting random audits of internal documentation, and ensuring our systems were current with evolving regulations. The challenges were significant. Regulations changed frequently, requiring constant education and system updates. Some investment managers resented the documentation requirements I enforced, viewing them as bureaucratic obstacles rather than legal necessities. During high-volume periods, my team worked long hours to ensure nothing slipped through the cracks. Despite these challenges, I loved the precision of my work and took pride in maintaining an impeccable system. I had planned to grow at WealthGuard, possibly moving into a more senior compliance role or even helping develop industry standards through professional associations. My apartment walls featured framed certifications in regulatory compliance and information management. I had invested in continued education, attending conferences, and completing additional qualifications on weekends. WealthGuard had been more than a job to me. It represented security purpose and recognition of my specialized skills. I believed I had established myself as an indispensable part of the organization. The executives might not have known my name, but they benefited from the security my department provided. At least that is what I thought until Marcus Sanders arrived and turned my world upside down. Everything changed when WealthGuard hired Marcus Sanders as the new Chief Operating Officer. Marcus came from our main competitor with a reputation for aggressive cost-cutting and operational streamlining. Tall, always impeccably dressed in custom suits. With a Harvard MBA he mentioned in every conversation, Marcus carried himself with the absolute confidence of someone who believed efficiency trumped all other considerations. The company-wide meeting introducing him should have been my first warning. Standing on the stage of the corporate auditorium, Marcus unveiled what he called the Operational Excellence Optimization Plan. WealthGuard has become bloated with unnecessary processes and redundant positions, he announced, clicking through slides, showing overhead costs compared to industry averages. My mandate is to increase shareholder value by trimming the fat and focusing on revenue-generating activities. When the presentation reached the slide about departmental costs, he paused at the Compliance and Records Management section, which was highlighted in red. "This is particularly concerning," Marcus said, pointing at our budget. "We are spending 3 times the industry average on compliance and record-keeping. This is a support function, not a profit center, and it needs to be right-sized immediately." The words right-sized sent a chill through me. I glanced at Eleanor, whose face had hardened into a mask of professional neutrality, but I could see her knuckles whitening as she gripped her notebook. Within a week, Marcus announced a 30% staff reduction target for all departments not directly generating revenue. Eleanor fought hard for our team during executive meetings, but her influence was clearly diminished under the new regime. She returned from one particularly tense meeting looking defeated. "I tried Bessie," she said, closing my office door behind her. "But Marcus has the CEO's ear now. They want cuts, and our department is at the top of his list." The changes came swiftly. First, Marcus implemented new procedures that cut review times in half, putting enormous pressure on my team to process documentation more quickly. When I sent him a detailed analysis of how this increased our risk exposure, he responded with a terse email noted, "Proceed with implementation as directed." During a departmental review meeting, I gathered my courage to speak up. Armed with data and regulatory citations, I explained how the new processes could lead to compliance failures. "With all due respect, Mr. Sanders, FINRA Rule 4511 requires member firms to maintain clearly organized records of all business activities. The accelerated timeline you are proposing increases our error rate by 78% based on our test runs." Marcus leaned back in his chair and gave me a dismissive look. "Miss Reynolds, WealthGuard is not paying premium salaries for people to file papers all day. Other firms manage these requirements with half the staff and budget. Your department needs to adapt or be replaced." "My name is Bessie," I corrected quietly, but he had already moved on to the next agenda item. After the meeting, Eleanor pulled me aside. "Be careful, Bessie. Marcus is building a case against our entire department. Document everything, but keep your head down." The atmosphere throughout the company changed dramatically. The once collaborative environment became tense and competitive. Colleagues avoided Marcus in hallways, and whispered conversations stopped when he appeared. Weekly termination announcements became routine, with security escorting shell-shocked employees from the building. Rachel began panic, applying to other firms. "Half my team is gone, and I am doing the work of 3 people now," she confided during our lunch break. "They are setting us up to fail." Timothy from IT warned me that Marcus had been asking technical questions about our records management system. "He wanted to know if your processes could be automated or outsourced," Timothy said, looking uncomfortable. I told him it required specialized knowledge and judgment, but I do not think that is what he wanted to hear. Eleanor became increasingly concerned. During our weekly one-on-one, she closed the door and spoke frankly. "Bessie, I need to be honest with you. Your position is on the chopping block. Marcus has been asking about the legal minimum we need for compliance, not best practices." "But we just passed our audit with flying colors last year," I protested. The SEC specifically praised our system. Marcus calls that gold-plating. Eleanor sighed. He thinks we are exceeding requirements unnecessarily. I am fighting for you, but you should update your resume just in case. That night I could barely sleep. 7 years of building something valuable, only to have it dismissed as unnecessary overhead. I updated my LinkedIn profile and reached out to industry contacts, but compliance jobs were scarce in the current economic climate. Each day brought new rumors of cuts and restructuring. I tried to stay focused on my work while preparing for the worst, but the uncertainty was excruciating. My team members looked to me for reassurance I could not honestly provide. The anxiety began affecting my sleep, my appetite, and my overall health. Little did I know that despite all my preparations, I was completely unprepared for how quickly and brutally the axe would fall. The summons to Marcus's office came on a Tuesday morning. A calendar invitation appeared on my screen for a meeting in 30 minutes with Marcus, Eleanor, and Diana from Human Resources. The subject line simply read, "Personnel discussion." My stomach instantly knotted. I knew what this meant. I spent those 30 minutes backing up personal items from my computer and texting Rachel meeting with Marcus and HR. Wish me luck. Her response was immediate. Oh no. Let me know what happens. Marcus's corner office was a stark contrast to my windowless workspace. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of Lake Michigan, and his desk was empty, except for a single monitor and a small dish of premium chocolates he never offered to share. The walls featured his Harvard diploma and photographs of him shaking hands with various financial luminaries. Eleanor was already seated when I arrived, her face tense. Diana from Human Resources sat beside her with a folder in front of her. Marcus stood by the window looking out at the view rather than at me. Please sit down, Bessie, Diana said, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. Marcus turned from the window. We will keep this brief. As part of our operational restructuring, we have determined that your position is non-essential in our new organizational model. Today will be your last day at WealthGuard. The words hit like a physical blow. Non-essential. 7 years of dedicated service reduced to non-essential. I tried to steady my voice. With respect, my department manages all the regulatory documentation required by the SEC and FINRA. Without proper records management, the company faces significant compliance risks and potential penalties. Marcus waved his hand dismissively. I have worked with 3 financial institutions that managed compliance without a dedicated records custodian position. Your duties will be distributed among the remaining compliance team. I looked at Eleanor hoping for support, but she sat with her eyes fixed on the table. There was apology in her posture, but she remained silent. The decision is final, Marcus continued. Diana will explain your severance package. Diana slid a document across the table. The company is offering 2 weeks of severance pay, which is generous given the current financial climate. We will need you to sign this release of claims before receiving the payment. 2 weeks. After 7 years. I felt lightheaded as I skimmed the document, which included a non-disparagement clause and a release of all legal claims against WealthGuard. What about the transition? I asked. My systems are complex. The team will need guidance on the processes, especially with audit season approaching. Marcus checked his watch. We have allowed for a 15-minute desk clearing period. Your system access has already been revoked effective immediately. My access was already gone. They had cut me off before even telling me I was fired. The realization sent a wave of humiliation through me. Security will escort you to your desk, and then out of the building, Marcus continued. Standard protocol for financial institutions. Eleanor finally spoke, her voice quiet. Bessie has been an exemplary employee. Could we at least allow for a proper knowledge transfer? That will not be necessary, Marcus replied. The remaining team will manage. If there are questions, they can be directed to the compliance department. A security guard was already waiting outside the office door. The walk to my desk felt like a death march, with colleagues watching wide-eyed as I was escorted through the open office. Some quickly looked away, afraid of being associated with someone who had been terminated. Others gave sympathetic glances, but kept their distance. At my desk, I was given a small cardboard box for my personal items. 15 minutes to pack up 7 years. My hands shook as I gathered photos, certificates, and a few personal reference books. My computer remained locked, personal files now inaccessible. Timothy from IT passed by looking stricken. "I will call you later," he whispered, pretending to be checking something on a nearby printer. The security guard stood impatiently nearby, walkie-talkie in hand, as if I might try to steal something or sabotage systems I had spent years protecting. Walking out through the lobby, I clutched my sad little box of possessions against my chest like a shield. The receptionist I had greeted every morning for 7 years suddenly became very busy with her computer screen, avoiding eye contact. Outside on the sidewalk, I stood frozen, unsure where to go or what to do. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "What happened? Are you okay?" I could not bring myself to respond yet. The humiliation was too fresh, too raw. I wandered to a nearby park and sat on a bench, still holding my box, still wearing my company ID badge they had forgotten to collect. Later that evening, more messages came in. Rachel described the chaos after my departure. Nobody knows where anything is filed. Marcus told us to figure it out. Eleanor looks sick about the whole thing. Eleanor called that night, her voice heavy with regret. "I am so sorry, Bessie. I fought against this, but I was overruled. Marcus convinced Alan that your position was redundant luxury." "What about the upcoming audit?" I asked. "Who will handle the documentation requirements?" There was a pause. "Marcus says they can manage with the existing compliance team. He does not understand what you actually did here." I felt hollow as I ended the call. 7 years of building systems, preventing problems, protecting the company, all dismissed as non-essential. That night I cried until there were no tears left, then stared at the ceiling until dawn, wondering how I had become so disposable. The next few weeks passed in a blur of rejection, emails from job applications, dwindling savings, and creeping depression. I had defined myself by my work, my expertise, my contribution to WealthGuard. Without that identity, I felt unmoored and worthless. What I did not realize then was that WealthGuard had just made the most expensive mistake in its corporate history, and I would soon have front-row seats to the spectacular consequences. 3 months after my unceremonious exit from WealthGuard, I was sitting in a coffee shop preparing for yet another job interview when my phone began buzzing repeatedly. 4 missed calls from WealthGuard numbers in the span of 10 minutes. I silenced the phone, a bitter smile crossing my face. Then a text from Timothy appeared. "SEC is here conducting surprise audit. Nobody understands your system. Complete disaster. Please call me when you can." I stared at the message, feeling a complex mixture of emotions. Vindication, certainly. A twinge of satisfaction, absolutely. But also concern for my former colleagues caught in the crossfire of Marcus's reckless decisions. My phone buzzed again. Rachel, this time emergency. SEC auditors asking for records we cannot find. Marcus freaking out. "Can you help Will pay consulting fee?" As I contemplated whether to respond, my phone lit up with a call from Rachel. I hesitated, then answered. "Bessie, thank God." Rachel's voice was hushed and frantic. "I am hiding in the supply closet to make this call. It is absolute chaos here." "What is happening exactly?" I asked, my professional curiosity overriding my resentment. 5 SEC auditors showed up unannounced this morning. They are investigating a client complaint about potentially fraudulent transactions. They asked for the record's custodian right away, and nobody knew what to say. Rachel's voice cracked with stress. Eleanor tried to explain that we had undergone restructuring, but the lead auditor, this terrifying woman named Deborah Williams, said that was not an acceptable response. "What client complaint?" I asked, remembering a series of suspicious transactions I had flagged before my termination. "The Westlake Pension Fund. They claim their statements show unauthorized trading patterns. Marcus dismissed their concerns last month, said they were misreading the statements." I closed my eyes. This was exactly the kind of situation I had warned about. Westlake managed retirement funds for thousands of municipal workers. Any impropriety would trigger severe regulatory action. "What happened in the meeting?" I pressed. "It was brutal," Rachel continued. "We all gathered in the main conference room. The lead auditor asked specifically to see the record's custodian. There was this awful silence. Marcus tried to explain that we had distributed those responsibilities among the compliance team for greater efficiency." Rachel lowered her voice further. Then Matthew from legal leaned over and whispered loud enough for everyone to hear, "The $5 million hourly penalty began 12 minutes ago. You should have seen Marcus's face turn white." The SEC could impose penalties of $5 million per hour for failing to provide required records during an investigation. It was a devastating consequence designed to prevent firms from stonewalling or destroying evidence. Marcus tried to blame it on recent restructuring and mentioned you as the former employee who had managed the system. Rachel continued. Deborah shut him down immediately, saying organizational changes do not exempt the firm from regulatory obligations. My phone beeped with another incoming call, WealthGuard's main number. Rachel, someone else from WealthGuard is calling me right now, I said. Probably Eleanor or Alan. They are desperate. The auditors have given the company 24 hours to produce the required documentation before they escalate the penalties. Rachel paused. Will you help us? The compliance team is not at fault here. I ended the call with Rachel and stared at my phone as it continued to ring. Part of me wanted to let WealthGuard suffer the consequences of Marcus's arrogance. Why should I rescue the company that had treated me as disposable? When my phone rang again, I was surprised to see Alan Miller's personal cell number. The CEO himself was calling. With a deep breath, I answered. Bessie, this is Alan Miller, came the voice that I had previously heard, only in company-wide meetings. I hope you are doing well. The formality and pretense that this was a casual check-in irritated me. I doubt this is a social call, Mr. Miller. There was a pause. You are right. We are in a difficult situation, and I am calling to ask for your help. The SEC is conducting an audit, and we are having trouble locating certain records. You mean all the records I managed before being told my position was non-essential? I could not keep the edge from my voice. Alan sighed. I made a mistake approving Marcus's restructuring plan without fully understanding the implications. Now the company is facing potentially catastrophic penalties. We need your expertise, and we are prepared to compensate you appropriately for consulting services. $5 million per hour is the standard penalty for non-compliance during an SEC investigation, I noted. How many hours has it been since the auditors arrived? Almost 3, Alan admitted. Matthew estimates we are already looking at close to $15 million in penalties, and that is before any findings on the actual complaint. The magnitude was staggering. WealthGuard's annual profit was around $200 million. This single event could wipe out nearly 10% of their yearly earnings, not counting reputational damage and potential client exodus. I felt a strange sense of power that I had never experienced in my years at the company. The same executives who had dismissed my role as unnecessary overhead were now desperately seeking my help. What about Marcus? I asked. Where does he stand on bringing me back to help? Another pause. Marcus believes we can resolve this internally given enough time. I disagree. This is my decision, not his. I considered my options carefully. Part of me wanted to refuse out of spite to let the company that had discarded me face the full consequences of that decision. But another part of me thought about Eleanor, Rachel, Timothy, and the other colleagues who would suffer if WealthGuard imploded. This was larger than my grievance with Marcus. I need to think about this, I told Alan. And I need to consult with an attorney before making any decisions. If I do help, it will be under very specific terms. Of course, Alan replied quickly. Whatever you need. Just please consider it urgently. The clock is literally ticking on this. After ending the call, I sat in the coffee shop, my job interview preparation forgotten. The company that had escorted me out with security, that had given me 15 minutes to pack up 7 years of my life, that had declared me non-essential, was now facing ruin without my help. I felt a complex mix of emotions. Vindication that my role had proven essential after all satisfaction, that Marcus's arrogance had backfired, spectacularly concern for my former colleagues, and uncertainty about what I should do next. This was no longer about a job. It was about power, respect, and justice. I needed to decide whether to extend mercy to a company that had shown me none, or to stand back and watch as they faced the consequences of undervaluing critical work. The decision I made would not just affect WealthGuard's future, but would define who I was as a professional and as a person. I stared at my phone, contemplating my next move. Before responding to Alan's plea for help, I called Gabriela Martinez, an employment attorney a friend had recommended after my termination. She agreed to meet immediately, given the urgency of the situation. This is actually an incredibly strong position you are in, Gabriela told me as we sat in her downtown office. They terminated you improperly, eliminated a mandated compliance position, and are now facing regulatory penalties directly resulting from that decision. What are my obligations here? I asked. Legally speaking, do I have to help them? None whatsoever, she replied firmly. You have no legal obligation to rescue them from a crisis they created. However, if you choose to help, we can structure an agreement that protects you and compensates you appropriately. When I returned home, I called my mother, who had always been my moral compass. After explaining the situation, I asked what she thought I should do. Sweetheart, revenge might feel good for a moment, but it does not build anything lasting, she said thoughtfully. That said, do not let them take advantage of you again. If you help, do it on your terms, with your dignity intact. After careful consideration, I texted Alan that I would consider helping under specific conditions, and that any discussion would need to happen at my attorney's office, not at WealthGuard. The next morning I arrived at Gabriella's office to find Alan Marcus and Samuel Thompson, WealthGuard's chief legal officer, already waiting. Marcus looked like he had not slept his usual immaculate appearance, showing signs of strain. He avoided eye contact as we entered the conference room. Gabriella opened the meeting. My client is willing to provide consulting services to address the current SEC audit situation, but we need to establish clear terms. I looked directly at Alan. I have 3 non-negotiable conditions. First, compensation equivalent to 3 times my annual salary as a consulting fee paid up front. Second, a public apology acknowledging the error in eliminating my position. Third, a long-term consulting contract at double my previous hourly rate if you want ongoing support after resolving this immediate crisis. Marcus immediately objected. That is extortion. We are not going to be held hostage by a former employee taking advantage of a temporary situation. Samuel, the legal officer, shot Marcus a warning glance before turning to me. While the terms are steep, they are substantially less than the penalties accumulating hourly. From a purely financial perspective, it makes sense. The public apology is unnecessary and could create legal exposure, Marcus argued, still avoiding looking directly at me. Alan had been quietly observing. Now he spoke. Bessie, I understand why you are asking for these terms. The company treated you poorly, and now we are facing the consequences of that decision. He turned to Marcus. You assured me that eliminating the records custodian position would have no regulatory impact. You said it was redundant overhead. It has taken less than 3 months to be proven catastrophically wrong. The tension in the room was palpable. Marcus's face reddened. No one could have anticipated a surprise audit. This is an extraordinary circumstance. Actually, I interjected. Calmly, regulatory audits are a normal part of our industry. I prepared for them quarterly. That was part of my non-essential job. Alan's patience visibly frayed. Marcus, either agree to the terms or I will have to reconsider your position with the company. The board is convening an emergency meeting this afternoon, and I need solutions, not objections. In that moment, the power dynamic shifted completely. Marcus, who had so confidently declared my position unnecessary, was now being threatened with his own termination if he stood in the way of bringing me back. I will not personally deliver any apology, Marcus said stiffly. That is fine, Alan replied. I will issue the apology as CEO. I approved your recommendation, so the responsibility ultimately lies with me. Gabriella guided us through drafting a formal agreement. The legal language protected me from any blame for the current situation while ensuring prompt payment and clearly defined scope of work. By noon we had a signed contract, and I was officially a highly paid consultant for the company that had fired me 3 months earlier. As we prepared to leave, Rachel texted me. The auditors are getting impatient. How soon can you be here? Samuel looked anxious as I showed him the message. The penalties are approaching 20 million already. Can you start immediately? I nodded, feeling a strange mixture of vindication and responsibility. I will need full system access restored and a workspace away from Marcus's office. As we rode the elevator up to WealthGuard's offices, I noticed Marcus standing stiffly in the corner, still avoiding eye contact. Alan looked exhausted, but relieved. Thank you for agreeing to help us, despite everything, Alan said quietly. I want you to know I take full responsibility for the mistake we made. For the first time since my termination, I felt a sense of validation. My expertise wasn't just valuable, it was essential, and now everyone knew it. As we entered the familiar lobby, The receptionist's jaw dropped upon seeing me walk in alongside the CEO. Word spread quickly through the office as we made our way to the conference room where the auditors were waiting. Just to be clear, I told Alan before entering, I am doing this for the company and my former colleagues, not for Marcus. I will work with the audit team professionally, but I will not cover up any compliance failures that occurred after my departure. Alan nodded gravely. I would expect nothing less. Timothy intercepted us in the hallway, relief washing over his face. Bessie, thank God. They are asking for documentation we cannot even identify, let alone locate. Rachel appeared moments later, giving me a quick hug. You have no idea how bad it has been. Nobody understood your filing taxonomy. We have been guessing for 3 hours. As we approached the conference room, I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and prepared to face the auditors who now held WealthGuard's fate in their hands. Behind me, I heard Timothy whisper to Rachel, "She is going to save the day, and they all know it. Thank you for standing up for all of us." In that moment, I realized that this was not just about personal vindication. It was about recognizing professional value, respecting expertise, and standing up for oneself in a system that often disregards those who do not generate direct revenue. No matter what happened next, I had already won the most important battle. Walking into WealthGuard as a consultant, rather than an employee, created an almost surreal feeling. Employees stared as I passed, whispering behind their hands. Some looked relieved, others embarrassed. Marcus trailed behind our group, his earlier confidence replaced by tense silence. The main conference room had been transformed into Audit Central, with stacks of hastily gathered documents covering the large table. 5 stern-faced auditors from the SEC looked up as we entered, expressions ranging from impatience to irritation. Deborah Williams, the lead auditor, was a formidable woman in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair and piercing eyes that missed nothing. She looked at me questioningly. "This is Bessie. Our former records custodian, Alan, introduced me. She has agreed to come in as a consultant to assist with accessing and organizing the records you have requested." Deborah's eyebrow raised slightly. "Former. When did you leave the company, Miss Bessie?" "I was informed my position was non-essential during a restructuring 3 months ago," I replied evenly, watching Marcus shift uncomfortably from the corner of my eye. "I see," Deborah said, exchanging glances with her team. "And who has been handling SEC record-keeping compliance since then?" A painful silence followed before Alan responded. The responsibilities were distributed among the compliance team. We now recognized this was an error in judgment. Deborah turned her attention fully to me. "Miss Bessie, we have been requesting specific transaction records for the Westlake pension account for the past 3 hours without success. Can you help us locate these?" "Yes," I said confidently. "I designed the record-keeping system and can navigate it. I will need my system access restored immediately." Timothy jumped in. "I have already prepared a new security credential. Full access just as before." For the next several hours, I worked systematically to locate the requested documentation. My digital filing system had remained largely intact, though I discovered disturbing gaps in records from after my departure. The compliance team had clearly struggled to maintain the rigorous documentation standards I had established. The audit team watched with growing interest as I efficiently retrieved files and explained the organization system. Deborah took extensive notes occasionally, asking pointed questions about why certain protocols had changed after my departure. These confirmation notices for the Westlake trades in February are missing the required compliance review signatures, she observed, pointing to a series of documents. Yet all the ones from January and earlier have proper sign-offs. I nodded. January was my last month with the company. I always personally verified high-risk transactions like these. Deborah turned to Marcus, who had been hovering at the edge of the room. "Mr. Sanders, who took over this verification process after Miss Bessie left." Marcus attempted to interject with a technical explanation about streamlined processes, but Deborah cut him off. "That is not what I asked. Who specifically was assigned to perform these legally mandated verifications?" When Marcus could not provide a clear answer, Deborah made a note in her file that made him visibly pale. As the day progressed into evening and then night, I discovered more troubling compliance failures. The most serious involved a pattern of questionable trades in the Westlake account that had not been properly documented or flagged for review. Under my system, these would have immediately triggered compliance alerts. Working through the night fueled by coffee and a determination to demonstrate my value, I helped reconstruct the documentation trail. I trained Rachel and the remaining compliance staff on proper procedures, showing them the shortcuts and search methods I had developed over the years. By morning, we had assembled most of the required documentation, though the gaps in post-termination records were impossible to fill completely. The audit team set up in a separate room to review the materials, while I continued organizing and explaining the system to the compliance team. Around noon on the second day, Alan called an emergency board meeting. I was asked to briefly describe what I had found, and the board members listened with growing concern as I outlined the compliance failures that had occurred in the 3 months since my departure. In my professional assessment, I concluded the company has experienced significant compliance deterioration since the elimination of the dedicated records custodian role. The current situation with the SEC could have been avoided had proper documentation protocols been maintained. After I left the boardroom, I continued working with the audit team. Hours later, Alan emerged from the continuing board meeting, looking grim but resolved. He asked to speak with me privately. The board has voted to suspend Marcus pending a full investigation of his restructuring decisions, he informed me. They were particularly concerned about his dismissal of the Westlake complaints that triggered this audit. I maintained a professional demeanor, though I could not deny the satisfaction I felt hearing this news. What about the audit? I asked. Deborah says they have enough documentation to complete their investigation. Based on their preliminary findings, we are looking at a fine of around $10 million for the documentation gaps and potential trading irregularities. That is substantially less than it could have been, I noted. Without any records, the penalties alone would have exceeded $100 million within days. Alan nodded gravely. The board recognizes that. They have also recognized the critical error in eliminating your position. We would like to discuss a permanent arrangement after the audit concludes. The audit continued for 3 more days. I worked directly with Deborah, who seemed impressed with my knowledge and attention to detail. She pulled me aside on the final day. You built an excellent compliance system, she said. It was the gaps after your departure that concerned us most. Had you still been in your role, I doubt these issues would have occurred. By the end of the week, the immediate crisis had been contained. The official findings would take weeks to finalize, but the existential threat to the company had passed. The estimated $10 million fine, while substantial, was manageable for a firm of WealthGuard's size. Alan scheduled a company-wide meeting where he formally addressed what had happened. Standing before hundreds of employees, he did something rare for a CEO. He admitted a mistake. 3 months ago, we made a serious error in judgment by eliminating our records custodian position and considering compliance as merely overhead rather than essential to our business integrity. I want to publicly apologize to Bessie, whose expertise we failed to value appropriately. Her willingness to return and help us through this crisis demonstrates a professionalism we should all aspire to. Marcus was notably absent. Word spread quickly that he had been asked to resign and had left the building earlier that day. His aggressive cost-cutting approach had ultimately cost the company far more than it had saved. After the meeting, Alan offered me the opportunity to return to WealthGuard with a director-level position and double my previous salary. The offer was tempting, but something had fundamentally changed for me. I had experienced both the vulnerability of being considered dispensable and the power of knowing my true worth. I appreciate the offer, I told him, but I think I would prefer to maintain my consulting relationship with WealthGuard while exploring other opportunities. The vindication was complete. My non-essential role had proven to be the difference between regulatory disaster and corporate survival. But more importantly, I had discovered something about myself in the process. I was not defined by a job title or a company's perception of my value. I was defined by my expertise, my integrity, and my willingness to stand up for what I knew to be right. As I packed up my temporary workspace, Rachel stopped by. "You saved us all," she said simply, "and you showed everyone exactly how essential you really are." I smiled, feeling a sense of closure and a new beginning simultaneously. "Sometimes you have to lose something to understand its true value," I replied, "both for them and for me." 1 year after the SEC audit that nearly destroyed WealthGuard Financial, I sat in the sleek conference room of my own consulting firm, Bessie Compliance Solutions. The downtown Chicago view from my office now rivaled Marcus's former corner office, and the satisfaction was sweeter for having earned it entirely on my own terms. After declining WealthGuard's offer to return as a director, I had taken a bold step into entrepreneurship. Using my reputation from the audit incident, which had become something of a legend in financial compliance circles, I launched a specialized consultancy focused on regulatory compliance and records management for financial institutions. The success exceeded my wildest expectations. Within 6 months, I had signed contracts with 3 major financial firms, including 2 of WealthGuard's direct competitors. By the 1-year mark, I had a team of 12 experts and a waiting list of potential clients. My company had become the gold standard for compliance solutions, commanding premium fees that reflected our specialized expertise. In a delicious twist of irony, WealthGuard became one of my largest clients. Alan had signed a long-term contract at my full rate without negotiation, recognizing that the cost of compliance expertise was insignificant compared to the potential regulatory penalties. Every quarter, I personally reviewed their systems to ensure they maintained the standards I had originally established. Eleanor, who had felt trapped and powerless during my termination, found the courage to leave WealthGuard 6 months after the audit. I immediately offered her a partnership position, which she accepted, with tears in her eyes. "I should have fought harder for you," she admitted during her first day. "You did what you could in an impossible situation," I assured her. "Now we get to build something better together." Rachel joined our team next, bringing her analytical skills and detailed knowledge of regulatory requirements. Timothy followed shortly after, heading our technical implementation division. The core group that had valued my work at WealthGuard now formed the foundation of my thriving business. The journey to this point had not been easy. After the initial vindication of the audit crisis, I experienced a period of emotional turbulence. The termination had wounded me deeply, attacking my sense of professional identity and worth. There were nights I woke up in a cold sweat, reliving the humiliation of being escorted from the building with a cardboard box. Healing came gradually. I worked with a career counselor who specialized in workplace trauma, learning to separate my self-worth from external validation. I reconnected with industry colleagues, rebuilding a network based on mutual respect rather than corporate hierarchy. Most importantly, I learned to value my expertise independently of titles or organizations. My new company culture reflected these hard-won lessons. Every team member was considered essential, with compensation and recognition that reflected their contributions regardless of their role. We celebrated knowledge and integrity over revenue generation, creating an environment where compliance was viewed as a competitive advantage rather than a cost center. The financial industry took notice. Trade publications featured articles about our approach, and I was invited to speak at conferences about the business value of compliance excellence. My termination story became a cautionary tale for executives considering short-sighted cost-cutting measures. During a national compliance convention in New York, I unexpectedly encountered Marcus in the hotel lobby. He had aged visibly in the year since WealthGuard, now working for a much smaller firm where his cost-cutting approach likely did less damage. He nodded awkwardly upon seeing me, clearly uncomfortable. To my surprise, he approached. "Your company is doing well," he said stiffly. "Congratulations." "Thank you," I replied. "It turns out there is significant market demand for essential services." He flinched slightly at the word essential, but continued. "WealthGuard made a mistake. I made a mistake." It was the closest thing to an apology I would ever receive from him, and I accepted it with a simple nod before walking away. I no longer needed his validation or remorse. His career had suffered while mine had flourished, a market correction that spoke for itself. The greatest lesson from my journey was understanding that no one else should define your professional value. Organizations often mistakenly measure worth by proximity to revenue, undervaluing the critical infrastructure that enables that revenue to exist safely and legally. True professionals know their value regardless of how others perceive it. My mother had wisely told me that revenge builds nothing lasting, and she was right. The satisfaction of seeing Marcus humbled was fleeting, but the business I built from that experience created lasting value for myself, my team, and our clients. The best response to being undervalued is not resentment, but reinvention. Today, I regularly mentor young professionals, particularly women in compliance and regulatory roles, teaching them to advocate for themselves and recognize their worth in corporate environments. I share my story as a reminder that being deemed non-essential by one short-sighted executive does not define your actual value. The stunning view from my office, serves as a daily reminder of how far I have come from that devastating day when I carried my small box of possessions out of WealthGuard. Sometimes the worst moments in our professional lives become the foundation for our greatest achievements. Being fired forced me to reimagine my career on my own terms, ultimately leading to greater success, autonomy, and satisfaction than I would have found remaining in my original role. As I look toward the future, I am grateful for the painful lesson that revealed my true worth. By trying to make me small, Marcus inadvertently showed me how big I could become. Now I run a thriving business built on the principle that expertise and integrity are always essential, regardless of how directly they connect to the bottom line. Have you ever been undervalued at work or had your contributions dismissed? How did you respond? Did it become a turning point in your career? Share your experience in the comments below. And if you found my story of corporate redemption satisfying, please hit that like button, subscribe to hear more workplace justice stories, and share this video with anyone who needs a reminder of their true professional worth. Remember, sometimes the best revenge is not just success, but creating a better model than the one that failed to value you. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I wish you the courage to stand firm in your own professional value, no matter what challenges you face.